A gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Denver, Colorado, as Matthew Yates rode into town, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of golden dust in the summer of 1874. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered buildings, and even from the outskirts, he could tell this town carried secrets as heavy as the gun on his hip. The journey from Montana had been long, but the promise of work had drawn Matthew south to Colorado territory. A ranch hand by trade and a wanderer by circumstance, he'd spent the better part of his 30 years drifting from one cattle outfit to the next. His sun-weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who'd lived more outdoors than in, and the quiet intensity in his blue eyes suggested he'd seen more than most men twice his age. As Matthew approached the town center, he noticed a small crowd gathered outside the general store. The commotion drew his attention, and he slowed his chestnut gelding to a walk, observing the scene with wary interest. A woman stood on the wooden boardwalk, clutching a young boy to her side while arguing with a heavy-set man in a shabby suit. "Mrs. Turner, I've been more than patient," the man was saying, his voice carrying down the street. "The bank can't extend your loan again. Without payment by the end of the month, we'll have no choice but to foreclose." "Please, Mr. Hoffman," the woman replied, her voice steady despite the obvious distress in her posture. "The farm will produce enough to cover everything once the harvest comes in. I just need a little more time." Matthew dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby hitching post. Without meaning to, he'd drawn closer to the confrontation, something about the woman's dignified stance catching his attention. She was tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. Even from a distance, he could see the determination in her eyes, though fatigue lined her face. The boy beside her, no more than 7 or 8, clung to her skirts, looking up at the banker with a mixture of fear and defiance that seemed beyond his years. "Olivia," the banker sighed, removing his hat and wiping his brow, "I understand your position, but sentiment can't pay your late husband's debts. I've got a business to run." At the mention of her husband, Matthew noticed the black band around her arm, a widow then. Something in his chest tightened. "2 weeks, Mr. Hoffman, that's all I ask," she replied. The banker shook his head. "I can't promise anything. Good day, Mrs. Turner." He turned and walked away, leaving Olivia Turner standing rigid on the boardwalk. Matthew watched as she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and looked down at her son. "Come along, William. We need to get home before dark." As they moved toward a worn wagon at the far end of the street, Matthew found himself following. He wasn't sure why he had no business interfering in a stranger's troubles, but something about her quiet dignity moved him. "Madam," he called out, tipping his hat when she turned toward him. "Pardon the intrusion, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm looking for work, and if you need help with that harvest you mentioned, I'd be willing." Olivia Turner studied him, wariness evident in her green eyes. "And who might you be, sir?" "Matthew Yates, madam, just rode in from Montana. I've worked cattle most of my life, but I know my way around crops too." She seemed to weigh his words, glancing down at her son before meeting Matthew's gaze again. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Yates, but I can't afford to hire help right now. That's rather the problem." Matthew nodded. "I understand that. I'm not asking for money up front, just a place to stay and meals while I work. If your harvest comes in well enough to pay that banker, you can pay me then. If not," he shrugged. "I was moving on anyway." Suspicion flashed in her eyes. "That's very generous." "Why would a stranger make such an offer?" "Because I've been down on my luck before, Mrs. Turner. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to lend a hand." Matthew adjusted his hat, suddenly uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "But I understand your caution. If you change your mind, I'll be at the saloon looking for a room." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Mr. Yates." Olivia hesitated, then continued, "My farm is 5 miles east of town. If you're serious about your offer, you can come by tomorrow morning." "I can't promise much, but we could use the help." Matthew nodded. "I'll be there at first light, Mrs. Turner." As he walked back to his horse, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Denver was supposed to be just another stop, not a commitment. Yet something about Olivia Turner's situation had resonated with him, perhaps because he recognized the look of someone fighting against impossible odds. The next morning, Matthew rode east as the first rays of dawn broke over the Rocky Mountains. The landscape opened before him, the prairie stretching toward distant foothills. After about an hour's ride, he spotted a modest farmhouse set back from the road, surrounded by fields of wheat rippling in the morning breeze. As he approached, he noted the signs of neglect. A sagging fence, peeling paint on the barn, weeds encroaching on what must once have been a kitchen garden. It wasn't abandoned, but it was clear that whoever was maintaining it was fighting a losing battle. He found Olivia in the barn, struggling with a broken wagon wheel. Her son William was attempting to help, his small hands gripping tools too large for him. "Good morning," Matthew called, not wanting to startle them. Olivia straightened, brushing hair from her face. "Mr. Yates, you came." "Said I would." He dismounted, surveying the situation. "Wagon gave out. Yes, the wheel split yesterday on our way back from town. I need to fix it to bring in the harvest." She gestured to the fields. "The wheat's ready, but I can't get it to market without the wagon." Matthew moved closer, examining the damaged wheel. "I can fix this. Have you got spare timber?" "Some in the back of the barn, but it needs cutting." "Show me." As they walked, William trailed behind them, watching Matthew with curious eyes. The boy's resemblance to his mother was striking, the same auburn hair, though his eyes were a deep brown rather than green. "How long have you been managing alone, Mrs. Turner?" Matthew asked as he assessed the woodpile. "James died 2 years ago, influenza." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Matthew caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "The first year wasn't too bad. We had savings, but last year's crop was poor and the debts mounted." Matthew nodded, selecting a suitable piece of timber. "And this year?" "The wheat looks good, but I'm running out of time. The bank wants payment in 2 weeks, and even if I harvest everything, I need to get it to the mill and sell it quickly." She hesitated. "That's why I accepted your offer, Mr. Yates. I have no choice but to trust you." "I understand." He met her gaze directly. "I give you my word, Mrs. Turner, I'm here to help, nothing more." For the first time, he saw a hint of a smile touch her lips. "Then please call me Olivia." "Matthew," he replied, and turned his attention to the wheel. By midday, Matthew had repaired the wagon wheel and moved on to assessing the fields. The wheat was indeed ready for harvest, golden under the Colorado sun. It would be a race against time to bring it all in, but with 2 adults working, it might just be possible. Olivia called him for lunch, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and coffee. As they ate at the worn kitchen table, William peppered Matthew with questions about Montana and the cattle drives he'd worked. "Have you ever shot anyone?" the boy asked, eyes wide. "William," Olivia scolded. "That's not an appropriate question." Matthew smiled slightly. "It's all right. No, William, I haven't. A gun is a tool, not a toy, and I've been fortunate enough to rarely need it." The boy looked disappointed but quickly rallied. "Pa taught me to shoot before he died. Said every man needs to know how." "Your father was right," Matthew replied, catching Olivia's gaze. "But there's more to being a man than knowing how to use a gun." After lunch, they began work on the harvest. The August heat was punishing, but Matthew worked steadily, his broad shoulders and back accustomed to physical labor. Olivia worked alongside him, her determination evident in every movement. By sunset, they had cleared only a small portion of the field, but it was a start. As darkness fell, they returned to the house tired but satisfied with the day's progress. Olivia prepared a simple stew while Matthew tended to his horse and the farm animals. When he returned to the house, he found the table set and William waiting impatiently. "I showed Matthew where to wash up, Ma," the boy announced proudly. "Thank you, William." Olivia ladled stew into bowls. "I hope you don't mind simple fare, Matthew." "Not at all." He took his seat, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd sat at a family table. "This is more than generous." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the day's exertions having taken their toll. As Olivia cleared the dishes, William began to fidget, his energy seemingly boundless despite the long day. "Time for bed, young man," Olivia said firmly, "but I'm not tired." William protested. "Can't I stay up a little longer, please?" Olivia shook her head. "You need your rest if you're going to help with the harvest tomorrow." William looked to Matthew for support, but the cowboy raised his hands in surrender. "Your mother's the boss, son." Reluctantly, William trudged upstairs after bidding Matthew good night. Olivia followed to tuck him in, leaving Matthew alone with his thoughts in the kitchen. He found himself studying the modest room, noting the small touches that made it a home: the faded curtains at the window, a child's drawing pinned to the wall, a well-worn Bible on a side table. When Olivia returned, she looked weary but smiled softly. "He wants a story before he'll settle down." "Would you mind if I left you for a few minutes more?" "Not at all," Matthew assured her. "Can I help with anything here?" She hesitated, then gestured to the dishes. "If you wouldn't mind bringing in some water from the pump, I'll wash these when I return." "I can wash them," he offered. "I'm not completely useless in a kitchen." This earned him a genuine smile, transforming her tired face. "Thank you, Matthew." As she headed back upstairs, Matthew rolled up his sleeves and set to work. The simple domestic task felt oddly satisfying after years of bunkhouse living. He could hear Olivia's voice faintly from above, the gentle cadence suggesting she was reading or perhaps singing to William. 20 minutes later, Olivia returned, surprise registering on her face at the sight of the clean kitchen. "You didn't have to do all that," she said. Matthew shrugged. "Seemed only fair, considering the meal and lodging." Olivia sank into a chair, fatigue evident in every line of her body. William finally fell asleep. He gets restless at night, especially since James died. Nightmares sometimes. "That's tough," Matthew replied, taking the seat across from her. "Losing a father at that age. He's resilient. Children adapt." She stared into the distance. "Sometimes I think he's handling it better than I am." "And how are you handling it?" The question slipped out before Matthew could think better of it. Olivia looked surprised, as if no one had asked her that in a long time. "I'm managing one day at a time," she offered a wan smile, "though some days are harder than others." "I can see that," Matthew said quietly. "But from what I've seen today, you're doing a remarkable job under difficult circumstances." Olivia's eyes met his, vulnerability showing briefly before she composed herself. "Thank you, that means more than you might realize." She stood suddenly. "I should show you where you'll sleep. There's a spare room off the kitchen that James used as an office. It's small, but there's a cot." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow cot and a small desk, but it was clean and private, a luxury compared to many places Matthew had slept over the years. "This will be fine, thank you," he said, setting his saddlebags on the floor. "I'll leave you to get settled then. We should start at dawn tomorrow if we want to make real progress on the harvest." She paused at the door. "Good night, Matthew." "Good night, Olivia." After she left, Matthew sat on the edge of the cot, contemplating his situation. He'd come to Denver looking for temporary work, not entanglement in a widow's struggle to save her farm. Yet here he was, committed to helping this family he'd known for less than a day. It wasn't like him to get involved, to put down even temporary roots. As he pondered this, a sound from upstairs caught his attention, a child's cry, quickly followed by Olivia's soothing voice. William's nightmares, he guessed. Despite the closed door, he could faintly make out Olivia singing a lullaby, her voice surprisingly melodic and sweet. Matthew lay back on the cot, letting the distant song wash over him. It had been many years since anyone had sung him to sleep, and he found the sound unexpectedly comforting. As he drifted towards sleep, he wondered what it would be like to have such comfort every night, a home, a family, someone to care whether you woke in the morning. Such thoughts were dangerous for a man like him, he knew. But in the darkness of the small room, with Olivia's voice floating down from above, Matthew allowed himself to wonder. The following days established a rhythm. They rose with the sun, worked the fields until the heat became unbearable, rested during the hottest part of the day, and then continued until sunset. William helped as much as a child could, carrying water and small bundles of wheat, his enthusiasm never flagging despite the repetitive work. On the third evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Matthew broached a subject that had been on his mind. "At the rate we're going, we'll finish the harvest in time, but barely," he said, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Have you considered asking for help from neighbors?" Olivia sighed, her fingers working at a piece of mending in her lap. "The nearest neighbors are the Millers, 3 miles west. They're good people, but they have their own harvest to bring in, the Richardsons to the east." She hesitated. "They've made offers, but not the kind I'm willing to accept." Matthew's jaw tightened. "What kind of offers?" "John Richardson has been widowed for 5 years. He suggested that combining our lands through marriage would solve my financial troubles." Her voice was carefully neutral. "He's not a bad man, just opportunistic. And you're not interested? Olivia set down her mending, meeting his gaze directly. I married for love once, Matthew. If I marry again, which seems unlikely, it would have to be for the same reason. She smiled wryly. Besides, William can't stand the man, says his beard looks like a squirrel died on his face. Matthew chuckled, relieved by the lightening of the mood. Smart boy. Too smart sometimes, she agreed. Speaking of whom, it's past his bedtime. As if on cue, William appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Ma, I can't sleep. The dreams keep coming back. Olivia's expression softened. Come here, sweetheart. She opened her arms, and William climbed into her lap, despite being almost too big for such comfort. What was it this time? Pa was calling for help, but I couldn't find him, the boy mumbled against her shoulder. And then the dark came, and I could still hear him calling. Matthew looked away, giving them privacy in their grief. He stood to leave, but Olivia's voice stopped him. You don't have to go, Matthew. William's nightmares are no secret. She stroked her son's hair. They come and go. Some nights are worse than others. William turned his tear-streaked face toward Matthew. Ma sings to me when they're bad. It helps. Your mother has a beautiful voice, Matthew agreed, remembering the lullaby he'd heard that first night. They don't sleep at night, William said, his voice small. The bad dreams, they just wait until I close my eyes. Matthew knelt beside the chair, meeting the boy's gaze. I know about bad dreams, William, had plenty of my own over the years. You have, William's eyes widened, but you're not scared of anything. Matthew smiled gently. Everyone's scared of something. The trick is to remember that dreams, even the bad ones, can't really hurt you. Ma says the same thing, William admitted. And then she sings until they go away. Then I'll sing till they do, Olivia said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her son's head. She looked up at Matthew. Would you mind bringing that lamp closer? I can't see my mending in this light. Matthew obliged, setting the oil lamp on the small table beside her chair. The warm glow illuminated mother and child, creating a tableau of tenderness that stirred something deep within him. As Olivia began to sing, her voice low and sweet, Matthew sank back into his chair, captivated. The song was an old folk ballad about homecoming, her clear tones carrying easily in the still evening air. William's eyes grew heavy, his small body relaxing against his mother. When the song ended, William was nearly asleep. Olivia smiled at Matthew over her son's head. Would you mind helping me get him up to bed? He's getting too heavy for me to carry alone. Matthew carefully lifted the drowsy boy, following Olivia upstairs to a small bedroom under the eaves. As he laid William on the bed, the child stirred. Will you be here tomorrow, Matthew? He asked sleepily. Yes, son, I'll be here. Good, William murmured, already drifting back to sleep. You keep the bad dreams away too. Touched by the child's trust, Matthew stepped back as Olivia tucked the blankets around her son. They left the room together, Olivia pulling the door partially closed behind them. Thank you, she said quietly as they descended the stairs. He's taken to you quickly. He doesn't usually warm to strangers. He's a good boy. You should be proud. I am. She paused at the foot of the stairs, turning to face him. In the dim light of the hallway, her features were softened, vulnerability showing through her usual composure. Matthew, I want you to know how much I appreciate what you're doing for us. You could have ridden past that day in town, but you didn't. I'm glad I stopped, he replied honestly. Your boy's right, you have a gift with your singing. A faint blush colored her cheeks. James used to say the same thing. I sang in church before we married. Haven't done much of it since he died, except to William. That's a shame. The world needs more beautiful things in it. Their eyes met, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Olivia was the first to look away. It's getting late. We should both rest if we're to make progress tomorrow. She stepped back, creating distance between them. Good night, Matthew. Good night, Olivia. As he settled into his cot that night, Matthew contemplated the turn his life had taken. In less than a week, he'd gone from a drifting cowhand to feeling invested in the fate of this small family. It was dangerous territory for a man who'd spent years avoiding attachments, yet he couldn't bring himself to regret the decision that had brought him here. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another day of punishing work in the fields. They worked steadily, the rhythm of cutting and binding the wheat now familiar. By mid-morning, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, the wind picking up and carrying the scent of rain. "Storm's coming," Matthew observed, scanning the sky with a practiced eye. "Could be a bad one." Olivia followed his gaze, concern evident in her expression. "If it rains heavily, the wheat we've cut but not collected could be ruined." She wiped sweat from her brow. "We need to get as much as possible to the barn before it hits." They worked feverishly, loading the wagon with bound sheaves and making multiple trips to the barn. William helped where he could, his small face serious with concentration. By early afternoon, the sky had darkened ominously, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. "One more load," Olivia insisted as thunder rumbled in the distance. "We can get that section by the creek before the downpour starts." Matthew eyed the approaching storm doubtfully but nodded. "All right, but William stays in the barn. I don't want him caught out in this." Despite the boys' protests, they left him safely in the barn and hurried back to the field. They had just finished loading the wagon when the storm hit in earnest, rain suddenly sheeting down with tropical intensity. "We need to go," Matthew shouted over the wind, helping Olivia onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. He took the reins, urging the horses forward through the rapidly deteriorating conditions. The normally placid creek that bordered the eastern edge of the property was already rising, swollen with runoff from the hills. As they approached the crossing, Matthew saw with alarm that the water was much higher than usual, the current swift and muddy. "We need to find another way around," he said, pulling the horses to a halt. Olivia shook her head, rain plastering her hair to her face. "There isn't one. We have to cross here or go all the way back to the main road, which would add miles to our journey." Matthew assessed the crossing. Under normal circumstances, it was a simple ford, the creek bed firm and the water shallow. Now it looked treacherous, but the wagon was heavily loaded, and the longer they waited, the higher the water would rise. "Hold tight," he decided, flicking the reins to urge the horses forward. The team entered the water cautiously, the current immediately pushing against their legs. Halfway across, disaster struck. One of the horses lost its footing on the slippery creek bed, stumbling sideways and causing the wagon to lurch dramatically. The wheel Matthew had repaired just days before caught on a submerged rock, and with a splintering crack gave way. The wagon tilted sharply, and Olivia cried out as she was thrown from the seat. Matthew lunged for her but missed, watching in horror as she hit the water and was immediately swept downstream by the current. Without hesitation, Matthew dove into the churning water, powerful strokes carrying him after Olivia's struggling form. The cold shocked his system, and the current was stronger than he'd anticipated, pulling him under momentarily before he fought his way back to the surface. He caught a glimpse of Olivia ahead, her sodden skirts weighing her down as she battled against the flow. With desperate energy, he swam toward her, relief washing through him as his fingers closed around her arm. "I've got you," he gasped, pulling her against his chest with one arm while using the other to swim toward the bank. The current fought them, but Matthew's determination was stronger. With a final surge of effort, he reached the creek bank, dragging Olivia with him onto the muddy shore. They collapsed together on the ground, both coughing and gasping for breath. "Are you hurt?" Matthew asked as soon as he could speak, scanning her for injuries. Olivia shook her head, still fighting for breath. "No, just cold. The wagon, the horses will find their way home," Matthew assured her, helping her to her feet. "Our priority is getting you warm and dry." The rain continued to pour as they made their way back toward the house, Olivia leaning heavily against Matthew's side. By the time they reached the farmyard, William had emerged from the barn and was watching anxiously for their return. "Ma," he cried, running toward them through the downpour. "What happened? Where's the wagon?" "We had an accident at the creek crossing," Matthew explained, ushering both of them toward the house. "Everyone's fine, but your mother needs to get into dry clothes right away." Once inside, Matthew stoked the kitchen stove while Olivia went upstairs to change. William hovered anxiously, fetching blankets at Matthew's direction. "Is Ma going to be all right?" the boy asked, his voice small. "She's going to be just fine," Matthew assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your mother's stronger than she looks." When Olivia returned, dressed in dry clothing with her hair wrapped in a towel, Matthew insisted she sit by the stove while he made coffee. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling around the eaves of the old farmhouse. "The wagon," Olivia said finally, cradling her cup between her hands. Without it, we can't bring in the rest of the harvest or take what we've gathered to market. We'll figure something out, Matthew promised. Once the storm passes, I'll see if I can salvage the wagon or repair it again, and if you can't. Her voice was steady, but Matthew could see the fear in her eyes. Without that wheat sold, I can't pay the bank. Then we'll find another solution, he said firmly. I'm not giving up, and neither should you. Later that night, after William had gone to bed, Matthew and Olivia sat at the kitchen table discussing options. The storm had finally passed, leaving a sodden landscape and, they feared, a partially ruined harvest in its wake. John Richardson has a spare wagon, Olivia admitted reluctantly. He'd lend it to me, but the price would be too high, Matthew finished. What about the miller in town? Might he advance you credit against the wheat we've already harvested? Olivia shook her head. He's in league with the bank, they all are. She sighed, running a hand through her still damp hair. Sometimes I think James and I were foolish to try farming here. The land is good, but the community… She trailed off. Not everyone's against you, Matthew said quietly. I asked around town before I came here. Some folks spoke highly of you and James, said he was a good man. He was. A sad smile touched her lips. Stubborn as the day is long, but good-hearted, he believed in this place, in building something that would last. Her eyes met Matthew's. Why did you really stop to help us that day, Matthew? The truth. Matthew considered his answer carefully. When I saw you standing up to that banker, not backing down even though you were clearly afraid, it reminded me of my mother. She raised 3 boys on her own after my father died in the war, never asked for help, never showed weakness. He paused. She lost our farm in Kansas anyway. I was too young to help then. I'm not too young now. Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes. So this is about making peace with your past, maybe partly, Matthew acknowledged, but it's also about doing what's right. You and William deserve a fighting chance. Olivia reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his. Thank you for saving me today. I'm not sure I said that properly before. The simple contact sent a jolt through Matthew's system, awareness of her as a woman rather than just someone in need of help suddenly acute. You'd have managed, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. You're a survivor, Olivia Turner. She withdrew her hand slowly, something unreadable passing across her face. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. The morning revealed the storm's damage. Fields of uncut wheat had been flattened in places, and the creek had overflowed its banks, saturating the lower fields. The wagon lay on its side in the now receded creek, one wheel completely destroyed and the load of wheat ruined. After breakfast, Matthew rode into town to see if he could purchase parts to repair the wagon or perhaps rent another one. William accompanied him, eager to escape the farm and recover from the previous day's excitement. As they rode, William chattering happily beside him on a gentle mare, Matthew found himself enjoying the boy's company. There was something refreshing about his perspective, untainted by the cynicism that often came with age and experience. Do you like my mother? William asked suddenly, the question catching Matthew off guard. Of course I do, Matthew replied carefully. Your mother is a fine woman. William studied him with serious eyes. Pa used to look at Ma the way you do sometimes, like she was special. Heat crept up Matthew's neck. Your mother is special. She's brave and strong. Anyone would admire that. I think she likes you too, William continued, apparently satisfied with Matthew's discomfort. She smiles more since you came, and she sang last night after I was supposed to be asleep. She doesn't usually sing when she thinks no one's listening. Matthew wasn't sure how to respond to this revelation, so he changed the subject, pointing out a hawk circling high overhead. William was easily distracted, launching into a story about a nest of hawks he'd found with his father the previous spring. In town, their luck was mixed. The wagon wheel could be repaired, but it would take time and money, both in short supply. However, Matthew found an unexpected ally in the blacksmith, a burly man named Sam Donovan who had known James Turner. James helped me when my boy was sick 2 winters back, Sam explained, examining the broken wheel Matthew had brought. Sat up all night even though he had his own family to tend to. I never forgot that. The blacksmith offered to repair the wheel at cost and, more importantly, to loan Matthew a wagon in the meantime. It ain't pretty, but it'll haul your wheat, he said, leading them to a weathered farm wagon behind his shop. I can't thank you enough, Matthew said, shaking the man's hand. Just help that family keep their farm, Sam replied. There's been too many good folks forced out by Hoffman and his bank. Time someone took a stand. With the loaned wagon hitched to Matthew's horse, they headed back to the farm, William proudly perched on the seat beside Matthew. The boy's excitement was infectious, and Matthew found himself sharing in his optimism that things might work out after all. They arrived at the farm to find Olivia in the yard, hanging laundry on a line strung between two trees. She looked up at their approach, surprise and then relief washing over her face at the sight of the wagon. "How on earth did you manage this?" she asked as they pulled to a stop. Matthew explained their encounter with the blacksmith as he helped William down from the seat. "Seems your husband made quite an impression on folks around here." "Sam Donovan," Olivia murmured, touching the wagon's weathered side almost reverently. "James sat with his son through pneumonia. I'd forgotten." Her eyes met Matthew's. "Thank you for finding a way." "It was mostly luck," Matthew admitted, "and your husband's good deeds coming back to you." With the wagon problem solved, they returned to the fields that afternoon, salvaging what they could of the flattened wheat and continuing the harvest of what remained standing. The work was harder after the rain, the ground muddy and the wheat heavier with moisture, but they pressed on. As the days passed, Matthew noticed a subtle shift in Olivia's demeanor. The worried frown that had seemed permanently etched between her brows began to ease, and occasionally he caught her humming as she worked. More than once, he found himself watching her when she wasn't aware, admiring the graceful economy of her movements and the quiet strength she demonstrated day after day. William, too, seemed to be thriving under the arrangement. The boy attached himself to Matthew whenever possible, full of questions about cattle drives and life in the West. His nightmares, while not gone entirely, had become less frequent, and Olivia mentioned that he was sleeping better than he had in months. A week after the storm, they completed the harvest, the barn now filled with as much wheat as they'd been able to salvage. It wasn't the abundant crop Olivia had hoped for, but it might be enough to satisfy the bank if they could get it to market and sold quickly. The evening after they finished, Olivia prepared a special supper to celebrate, using precious stores to make a pie with dried apples and cinnamon. As they sat around the table, the atmosphere was lighter than it had been since Matthew's arrival. "I propose a toast," Olivia said, raising her cup of cider. "To good friends and successful harvests, and to new beginnings," Matthew added, meeting her eyes over the rim of his cup. William, not to be outdone, raised his own cup. "To no more bad dreams." They all laughed, the sound warming the small kitchen. After the meal, William convinced Matthew to teach him how to play checkers with a set that had belonged to James, while Olivia cleared away the dishes. Later, with William in bed, Matthew and Olivia sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening air. Stars dusted the sky above, brilliant in the clear aftermath of the storm. "We'll take the wheat to the mill tomorrow," Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "If Mr. Parker gives us a fair price, I should have enough to make the payment to the bank." "And if not?" Matthew asked. She shrugged, a gesture that tried for nonchalance but didn't quite achieve it. "Then I sell what I can and pray for a miracle or start packing." "It won't come to that," Matthew assured her. "We'll get a fair price." "We," Olivia repeated softly. "You keep saying that as if this is your fight too." Matthew turned to face her, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the way the moonlight silvered her hair and softened her features. "Maybe it has become my fight." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I care what happens to you and William," he admitted. "More than I expected to, more than might be wise." Olivia's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. "Matthew, I know," he said quickly. "You're not looking for complications, neither was I, but here we are." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands folded in her lap. "When James died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd spend the rest of my days focused solely on raising William and keeping this farm going. I didn't expect to feel anything else ever again." "And now?" Matthew asked, hardly daring to breathe. Olivia looked up, vulnerability and something else, something that made his heart race in her eyes. "Now I'm not so sure. You've brought something back to life here, Matthew, not just the farm, me." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Matthew reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were work roughened like his own, strong and capable, yet still undeniably feminine. "I haven't stayed in one place for more than a season in years," he said. "Haven't wanted to. But these past weeks with you and William." He paused, searching for the right words. "It feels like something I could get used to." A small smile curved Olivia's lips. "Is that your way of saying you might want to stick around, Matthew Yates?" "It might be," he admitted, "if there's a reason to." The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Matthew was acutely aware of every detail: the soft sound of her breathing, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her clothes, the warmth of her hand in his. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Olivia met him halfway, her lips touching his in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, Matthew saw his own wonder reflected in her eyes. "That's a pretty good reason," she whispered, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The moment was broken by a small voice from the doorway. "Ma, I had the dream again." They turned to find William standing there in his nightshirt, his hair tousled from sleep and his eyes wide with lingering fear. Olivia immediately opened her arms and the boy crossed to her, climbing into her lap despite being almost too big for such comfort. "I'm sorry we woke you," she said, stroking his hair. "You didn't," William mumbled. "It was the dream. Pa was lost in the dark again and I couldn't help him." Matthew watched as Olivia held her son close, her face a study in maternal love. "Your pa isn't lost, sweetheart. He's watching over you from heaven, remember, and he's very proud of how brave you've been." William nodded against her shoulder, then turned his face toward Matthew. "Will you stay with us, Matthew? Ma's not as sad when you're here." The directness of the child's question caught Matthew off guard. He glanced at Olivia, unsure how to respond. "William, that's not a fair question to ask," Olivia said gently. "Matthew has his own life, his own plans." "But he likes us," William insisted. "Don't you, Matthew?" "I do," Matthew confirmed, meeting the boy's earnest gaze. "Very much." "Then why would you leave?" It was a fair question, and one Matthew had been asking himself with increasing frequency. Why would he return to the solitary existence he'd known before, when something so much richer was potentially within his grasp? "I don't have a good answer for that, William," he admitted. "Maybe I wouldn't if I was invited to stay." Olivia's eyes met his over William's head, something warm and hopeful kindling in their green depths. "Perhaps that's a conversation for another time," she said softly. "Right now, someone needs to get back to sleep. Will you sing to me?" William asked, his eyes already growing heavy despite his protests. "Of course, let's get you back to bed." As Olivia stood with William in her arms, she paused beside Matthew. "Don't go anywhere," she said quietly. "Please, we have more to discuss." Matthew nodded, watching as she carried William back into the house. Through the open window, he could hear her voice as she began to sing, the sweet melody drifting out into the night. The same lullaby he'd heard that first evening, about coming home at last after a long journey. As he listened, Matthew realized with startling clarity that for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, he didn't want to move on. The thought of leaving this place, these people, created an ache in his chest that no amount of open road could soothe. When Olivia returned, her expression was thoughtful. She resumed her seat beside him, closer than before, their shoulders almost touching. "He's asleep," she said. The song worked its magic as usual. "You have a beautiful voice," Matthew told her. "You should use it more often." "Perhaps I will." She turned to face him directly. "Matthew, what you said before about staying, did you mean it?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I know it's sudden, we've only known each other a short while, but I've never felt this way about anyone or any place before." "What way is that?" Olivia asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "Like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." He took her hand again, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I can't offer much, Olivia. I don't have land or savings, just my hands and my word." "Sometimes that's enough," she replied. "More than enough." The kiss they shared this time was deeper, filled with a longing neither had allowed themselves to acknowledge until now. When they finally parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the moment. "I don't want to rush you," he said, "or William, you've both been through so much." "We have," Olivia agreed. "But life doesn't stop because of grief. James would have wanted us to be happy." She pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "You make us happy, Matthew. You've brought hope back to this farm and to us." Then let me stay, he said simply. Let me help you fight for this place, and when that's done, we can decide what comes next. Olivia nodded, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. I think I'd like that very much. The following morning, they loaded the wheat onto the borrowed wagon and set out for the mill, William riding between them on the seat. The boy had been overjoyed to learn that Matthew would be staying, at least for the foreseeable future, and chatted excitedly about all the things they could do together. At the mill, they encountered the expected resistance. Mr. Parker, a thin man with calculating eyes, offered a price well below market value for the wheat, citing its condition after the storm. "This is robbery and you know it," Matthew said firmly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Olivia. "This wheat is good quality despite the weather." "Take it or leave it," Parker shrugged. "You won't get a better offer in Denver." "Then we'll go to Boulder," Olivia replied, her chin lifted in defiance. "I hear Mr. Jenkins there pays fair prices." Parker's expression hardened. "That's a day's journey each way." "Your wheat might not last the trip." "We'll risk it," Matthew said, placing a protective hand at the small of Olivia's back. "Come on, Olivia, William, we're done here." As they turned to leave, Parker called after them. "Wait, perhaps we can come to a more reasonable arrangement." The negotiation that followed was tense, but ultimately successful. The price Parker finally agreed to would cover the bank payment with a small amount left over, not the profit Olivia had hoped for, but enough to keep the farm for now. As they left the mill with the payment safely tucked away, Olivia's relief was palpable. "We did it," she breathed, looking up at Matthew with shining eyes. "We actually did it." "You did it," Matthew corrected her. "This is your victory, Olivia." They went directly to the bank, where Mr. Hoffman seemed genuinely surprised to see them with payment in hand. After completing the transaction, Olivia stood a little taller, a weight visibly lifted from her shoulders. "I'll expect the next payment on time, Mrs. Turner," Hoffman said, adjusting his spectacles. "This merely buys you a reprieve." "I'm well aware of that, Mr. Hoffman," Olivia replied coolly, "and you can count on seeing me here with the next payment when it's due." As they left the bank, William spotted the general store across the street. "Ma, can we buy candy? Just a little to celebrate?" Olivia hesitated, then smiled. "Yes, I think we've earned that." In the store, while William carefully selected peppermint sticks with the few pennies Olivia had given him, Matthew noticed a poster on the wall announcing a harvest festival in 2 weeks' time. "Look at this," he said, pointing it out to Olivia. "There's going to be a dance and a community supper. Might be a nice way to celebrate properly." Olivia studied the poster, a hint of wistfulness in her expression. "I haven't been to a dance since before James died. I'm not sure I remember how." "I'd be happy to remind you," Matthew offered, his voice lowering. "Though I should warn you, I've been told I have 2 left feet." Her laugh, bright and spontaneous, drew the attention of the shopkeeper and several customers. "In that case, Mr. Yates, we'll make quite the pair. James always said I had the grace of a newborn colt." "It's settled then," Matthew said, enjoying the flush of pleasure on her face. "We'll go to the Harvest Festival." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. With the immediate threat to the farm resolved, they turned their attention to preparing for winter, repairing fences, sealing drafts in the house, putting up preserves from Olivia's small kitchen garden. Matthew fixed the broken wagon wheel when Sam returned it, thanking the blacksmith profusely for his help. Throughout it all, the tentative relationship between Matthew and Olivia continued to blossom. They were careful around William, mindful of the boy's attachment to his father's memory, but the child seemed to accept Matthew's growing role in their lives with uncomplicated happiness. The night of the Harvest Festival arrived clear and cool, with a harvest moon hanging low in the sky. Matthew had ridden into town earlier to return Sam's wagon and retrieve his best shirt, which he'd left at the hotel when he first came to the farm. Now, freshly shaved and dressed in his cleanest clothes, he waited in the kitchen for Olivia and William to finish getting ready. When Olivia descended the stairs, Matthew's breath caught. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, her auburn hair arranged in loose curls around her face rather than the practical bun she usually favored. A ribbon that matched her dress was tied at her throat, and she'd clearly taken extra care with her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. A blush crept up her cheeks. Thank you, it's been a long time since I dressed for anything but work. William bounded down after her, his hair slicked down with water and his face scrubbed clean. Do I look handsome too? He asked, straightening his small jacket importantly. The handsomest young man in Colorado territory, Matthew assured him, ruffling the boy's carefully arranged hair and earning a mock scowl. The ride to town was filled with anticipation, William bouncing excitedly on the wagon seat between them. As they approached Denver, they could see lanterns strung across the main street and hear the sounds of fiddle music drifting through the evening air. The town square had been transformed for the occasion. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a space had been cleared for dancing. Lanterns hung from trees and posts, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Farmers and townspeople mingled, the divisions that often separated them temporarily set aside in the spirit of celebration. As they entered the square, several people called greetings to Olivia and William. Matthew noticed with interest that many seemed genuinely pleased to see them, contrary to Olivia's belief that the community was against her. Mrs. Turner, we're so glad you could make it, a plump woman approached, smiling warmly. And William, my goodness, how you've grown, Mrs. Wilson, Olivia greeted her. It's good to see you. Allow me to introduce Matthew Yates. He's been helping us with the harvest. Pleased to meet you, madam, Matthew said, tipping his hat. Mrs. Wilson's eyes twinkled with undisguised interest as she glanced between Matthew and Olivia. Well, isn't that nice? The buffet is open and the dancing will start properly once everyone's had their fill. Do enjoy yourselves. As they moved through the crowd, more introductions were made. Matthew met the doctor who had attended James in his final illness, the school teacher who spoke highly of William's quick mind, and various farmers who had known James. Many expressed surprise and pleasure at seeing Olivia at a social event again. I had no idea you knew so many people, Matthew commented as they filled plates at the buffet table. I suppose I've been keeping to myself since James died, Olivia admitted. It's easier that way sometimes, less explaining to do. Well, they seem happy to see you now. After eating, William ran off to play with other children, leaving Matthew and Olivia alone as the dancing began in earnest. The music was lively, fiddles, and a piano creating a festive atmosphere as couples took to the makeshift dance floor. May I have this dance, Mrs. Turner? Matthew asked formally, extending his hand. Olivia hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. I warned you about my dancing, Mr. Yates, and I warned you about mine. We'll be terrible together. Their laughter drew curious glances as Matthew led her onto the dance floor. Despite their warnings to each other, they moved well together, quickly finding a rhythm that suited them. Matthew's hand at the small of Olivia's back guided her through the steps, while her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. You lied about having 2 left feet, Olivia accused playfully as he spun her in a circle. So did you, he countered. You're as graceful as they come. They danced several more dances, lost in each other's company until William reappeared, tugging at Olivia's skirt. Ma, they want you to sing. He announced excitedly. Mr. Peterson says the band will play if you'll sing that song you used to do at church socials. Olivia's eyes widened. Oh, I couldn't possibly, please, Ma, William begged. I told Tommy Miller that you have the prettiest voice in Colorado and he didn't believe me. Matthew squeezed her hand encouragingly. Show them what you can do, Olivia. I'd like to hear you sing properly too. After more persuasion, Olivia reluctantly agreed. Word spread quickly, and a hush fell over the gathering as she made her way to the small platform where the musicians were set up. After a brief consultation with the piano player, she turned to face the crowd, her hands clasped tightly before her. For a moment, Matthew feared she might change her mind and flee. But then the piano began a gentle introduction, and Olivia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The song was an old ballad about love lost and found again, and from the first note, Olivia's voice captivated the audience. Clear and sweet, it carried across the square, silencing even the most talkative attendees. Matthew watched, transfixed, as she gradually relaxed into the performance, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each verse. When the song ended, there was a moment of reverent silence before the crowd erupted in applause. Olivia's cheeks flushed with pleasure as she hurried back to Matthew's side. That was beautiful, he told her, taking her hand. "You should sing more often." "Perhaps I will," she replied softly. It felt good, like reconnecting with a part of myself I'd forgotten. As the evening wore on, William eventually fell asleep on a bench, exhausted from play and excitement. Matthew carried him to the wagon when it was time to leave, laying him gently on a blanket in the back. The ride home was quiet, a comfortable silence between Matthew and Olivia as they enjoyed the peacefulness of the night. The harvest moon lit their way, casting silver light across the landscape. "Thank you for tonight," Olivia said as they approached the farm. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to be part of something larger than my own troubles." "You have more friends in this community than you realized," Matthew observed. "People who care about you and William." "Yes, I'm beginning to see that." She glanced at him, her profile delicate in the moonlight. "And I have you to thank for that, too. You've helped me see beyond my grief and worry to what's still possible." At the farmhouse, Matthew carried the still sleeping William upstairs to his bed while Olivia lit lamps downstairs. When he returned to the kitchen, he found her waiting for him, her face thoughtful. "What is it?" he asked, recognizing the signs of something weighing on her mind. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said, her fingers tracing patterns on the kitchen table. "The bank payment is made, the harvest is in. You've fulfilled your promise to help us through the crisis." Matthew moved closer, his heart suddenly pounding. "Are you asking if I'm planning to leave now?" "No," she said quickly, looking up to meet his gaze. "No, I'm asking if you'd consider staying, not just for a while, but—" She faltered. "Permanently," Matthew supplied, hope rising in his chest. Olivia nodded, vulnerability clear in her expression. "I know it's forward of me to ask, we've known each other such a short time. But I can't imagine this place without you now. William adores you and She took a deep breath. "I've come to care for you deeply, Matthew." Matthew closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I was going to ask if I could court you properly," he admitted. "I didn't want to presume anything, given your situation and William." "Court me," a smile curved her lips. "That sounds very formal." "I want to do this right, Olivia. You and William deserve that." He squeezed her hands gently. "But yes, I want to stay. I want to help you make this farm thrive again. I want to be part of your lives if you'll have me." "We'll have you," she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Gladly." The kiss they shared was tender, a promise exchanged without words. When they parted, Matthew cradled her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. "I never expected to find a home when I rode into Denver," he said softly. "I've been drifting so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. And now—" Olivia asked, her hands resting lightly on his chest. "Now I know, home isn't a place, it's people. It's you and William." Over the following months, Matthew became an integral part of life on the Turner farm. He and Olivia worked side by side, repairing what time and neglect had damaged, planning for the next planting season, and gradually building a life together. William's nightmares grew less frequent, and when they did come, both Matthew and Olivia were there to comfort him. The boy flourished under their combined care, his natural curiosity and intelligence encouraged by Matthew's stories and Olivia's patient guidance. Their courtship progressed naturally, with respect for James's memory and William's feelings. Matthew moved into a small cabin on the property that had once housed hired help, maintaining propriety while still being close enough to help with daily chores and emergencies. By Christmas, the farm had been transformed. The fences were mended, the barn roof repaired, and the house made tight against winter's chill. More importantly, laughter had returned to the Turner household. Olivia sang regularly now, both to William at bedtime and around the house as she worked. Sometimes Matthew would join in, his deep baritone complementing her clear soprano on Christmas Eve. With snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Matthew presented Olivia with a small wooden box he'd carved himself. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the intricate design of leaves and vines he'd etched into the lid. "Open it and see," he encouraged, acutely aware of William watching with barely contained excitement from his place by the fire. Inside the box lay a simple gold ring with a small pearl set into the band. Nothing extravagant, but purchased with the wages Matthew had finally allowed Olivia to pay him once the farm was secure. "Matthew," Olivia breathed, looking up at him with wide eyes. He took her hand, kneeling before her. Olivia Turner, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You and William have become my family in every way that matters." He paused, gathering his courage. "I love you both, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Before Olivia could respond, William launched himself across the room, throwing his arms around Matthew's neck. "Say yes, Ma, please say yes." Laughing through tears, Olivia joined them on the floor, her arms encircling them both. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Matthew Yates, I will marry you." They were married in the spring of 1875 as the first wildflowers bloomed across the Colorado prairie. The small church in Denver was filled with well-wishers, friends, and neighbors who had come to respect the quiet cowboy who had helped save the Turner farm and brought joy back to Olivia and William's lives. After the ceremony, as they greeted guests outside the church, William tugged on Matthew's jacket. "Does this mean I can call you Pa now?" he asked, his expression serious. Matthew knelt to the boy's level, placing his hands on William's shoulders. "I would be honored if you did, son. But I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace your father. James will always be your Pa too." William nodded solemnly. "I know. Ma says we can keep Pa in our hearts and still have room for you too." "Your mother is a very wise woman," Matthew agreed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. That night, after the celebrations were over and William was asleep, Matthew and Olivia sat on the porch of what was now their home together. The stars shimmered overhead, and the soft sounds of night creatures created a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "Are you happy, Mrs. Yates?" Matthew asked, his arm around his new wife's shoulders. "Completely," Olivia replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how much has changed in less than a year. When you rode onto our farm that day, I was desperate and afraid. Now, he prompted. "Now I feel like anything is possible." She turned to face him, her hand resting against his cheek. "You gave us hope when we needed it most, Matthew. You reminded me that life goes on, that joy can follow sorrow. You did the same for me," he told her. "I was just drifting, existing rather than living. You and William gave me a purpose, a place to belong." From inside the house came the sound of a child's cry. They exchanged a knowing glance. William's nightmares, though less frequent, still occasionally disturbed his sleep. "I'll go," Matthew offered, rising from his seat. "We'll both go," Olivia said, taking his hand. "That's what family does." They found William sitting up in bed, his face tear-streaked in the dim light of the oil lamp beside his bed. "The dreams came back," he whispered as they entered. "It's all right, son," Matthew assured him, sitting on one side of the bed while Olivia took the other. "We're here now." "They don't sleep at night," William murmured, repeating the words he'd spoken months ago. "The bad dreams, they just wait until I close my eyes." "Then I'll sing till they do," Olivia replied softly, gathering her son close. As she began to sing, her voice gentle in the darkness, Matthew joined them, his arm encircling them both. This, he thought, was what he'd been searching for all his life, without knowing it, not just a place to call home, but people to share it with. A family. William's eyes grew heavy as the lullaby continued, the fears of the night receding in the presence of those who loved him. And as Olivia's voice filled the small room, Matthew knew with absolute certainty that he had found where he belonged at last. In the years that followed, the Turner Yates farm flourished. Matthew's experience with cattle proved valuable as they expanded beyond wheat into livestock, gradually building a modest but successful operation. Olivia continued to sing, eventually leading the church choir in Denver and teaching music to local children. William grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's musical talent and his stepfather's practical skills. The nightmares of his childhood faded, replaced by dreams of his own future, dreams that his parents encouraged and supported. And on clear nights, when the work was done and peace settled over the farm, Matthew and Olivia would often sit on the porch, watching the stars and marveling at the unexpected journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with a chance encounter on a dusty street in Denver, where a cowboy stopped to help a widow in need and found a home for his heart in return.